Sometimes things just subtly shift. Not a sudden, dramatic crash, but more like a slow, quiet erosion. Until one day, you wake up and nothing fits anymore. That's exactly how my marriage felt. It wasn't like a switch flipped overnight, it was more like realizing, after years, that your whole life has slowly but surely been getting heavier, and the person who was supposed to be carrying half the weight just isn't there anymore. And the worst part? The thing that absolutely shredded me was Olivia's favorite phrase. Her weapon, really. "I'm not your mom." She'd deliver it with this cold, cutting edge, every single time I'd ask for the smallest, most reasonable bit of help. Like, "Hey, could you maybe pick up Leo from soccer? I've got back-to-back meetings, totally stuck." Or, "The laundry's washed, just needs to go in the dryer, would you mind?" Stuff I'd already handled before even heading to work at 6 a.m. Honestly, if one more person tells me I should have communicated better, I might actually lose it. Because I communicated until I was blue in the face. I tried every angle, every calm conversation. And all I got back were lectures about emotional labor and mental load, from someone who hadn't lifted a single, solitary finger around the house for nearly 2 years. Olivia and we met in college. One of those chemistry study group situations that spilled over into late-night diner runs, and then, just became real. For years, everything felt balanced. Good. Like we were genuinely building something, together. We got married pretty young, maybe too young, according to her mom, who never missed an opportunity to remind us at every holiday dinner. Leo came when I was 26, Olivia 25. And then Maya, 3 years later, after we'd finally figured out how to keep one tiny human alive. The plan was always for Olivia to stay home with the kids. Not because I demanded it, a number 1950s throwback, but because she specifically said she wanted to be there for their early years. Didn't want to miss a moment. And I supported that, completely. I worked in project management for a tech company, nothing glamorous, but it paid well enough that we could manage on one income, if we were smart about it. For the first few years, Olivia seemed happy, or at least she never directly complained. But somewhere around the time Maya turned 2, something inside Olivia just shifted. It was like someone had flipped a switch in her brain, changing her from an engaged partner to a completely checked-out roommate. A roommate who, every now and then, would remind me she'd given birth twice. She started sleeping until 9 or 10 a.m., even though both kids were reliably up by 6:30. Which meant I was the one getting them dressed, fed, and out the door to daycare, all before my actual workday even began. And when I'd get home at 6 p.m., the house would look like a tornado had hit it. Toys everywhere, breakfast dishes still piled high in the sink, dishes I'd cleaned up the night before, mind you. Laundry overflowing. And Olivia? She'd be on the couch, scrolling through her phone or watching some Netflix show about people with problems far more dramatic than ours. I'm not exaggerating when I say I was doing everything. Literally everything. I kept a mental checklist, just to make sure I wasn't losing my mind. Up at 5:30 for a quick run, the only 30 minutes of the day that truly felt like mine. Shower. Wake up the kids. Make breakfast for everyone, including Olivia, who'd usually stumble out of bed right as we were leaving. Drop Leo at school, Maya at daycare. Work a full 9-hour day. Pick up both kids. Come home, make dinner, help Leo with homework. Bath time, bedtime routines. Clean the kitchen. Prep tomorrow's lunches. Maybe, if I was lucky, I'd get to sit down for an hour at 9 p.m. before passing out. Olivia's contribution during this time? Usually a comment about how tired she was. How hard it was being home with the kids all day, even though they were literally in school and daycare for 6 hours. How I just didn't understand the mental load of running a household. That phrase, mental load, became her favorite excuse. She'd read some article about emotional labor, and suddenly every single request I made was me adding to her invisible burden. Even though the actual, visible labor was all landing squarely on my shoulders. I tried talking to her, maybe a dozen times. Gentle conversations. I'd say something like, "Hey, I'm feeling pretty overwhelmed, and I could really use some help with the daily stuff." And she'd respond with lectures about how invalidating it was that I didn't recognize all the things she did that I couldn't see. What things? I wanted to scream. What exactly are you doing that's so invisible? Because I can see pretty clearly that you're not doing the laundry, or the dishes, or the cooking, or the cleaning, or the child rearing, but I never screamed. I was trying to be the reasonable one. Then came the incident that really opened my eyes, that showed me how far gone we truly were. The kitchen drawer where we kept utensils had broken. The slider mechanism had come off the track, and the whole thing was just hanging at an angle. I'd planned to fix it properly over the weekend. It needed the right parts from the hardware store. Olivia called me at work, absolutely frantic, saying she needed a fork and couldn't get into the drawer. This was exactly the kind of thing I always let slide until it became a crisis, which was rich, coming from someone who hadn't fixed a single thing in our house since we moved in. "Can you just come home and fix this?" she demanded. I calmly explained I was in the middle of a client presentation and couldn't leave, but I'd handle it that evening. "I need a fork right now, Alex," she said, her voice acquiring that sharp edge it always got when she wasn't getting her way. "So, open the drawer manually," I replied, trying not to lose my patience with people staring at me from across the conference table, or use a spoon, or literally just grab a fork from the dishwasher. That's when she hit me with it. The phrase that would become the soundtrack to our marriage's death rattle. Her voice dripped with contempt. "I'm not asking you to be my handyman. I'm asking for basic help. But I guess I forgot. I'm not your mom, so it's not my job to take care of you." I actually laughed. I couldn't help it. The irony was so thick you could cut it with one of the forks she apparently couldn't access. "You're right," I said, probably louder than I should have in a professional setting. "You're not my mom." Which is great, because my mom actually helped my dad, and didn't spend all day complaining about how hard it was to exist in a house someone else paid for. I hung up, finished my presentation somehow, and drove home that evening knowing, just knowing, something had fundamentally broken, something we probably couldn't fix. The drawer was still hanging off the track when I got home. Olivia was locked in our bedroom. Both kids were sitting in front of the TV, watching YouTube videos that were definitely not age-appropriate, because nobody had bothered to supervise them. I did a quick, temporary fix with duct tape just to make it functional. Made dinner. Did the whole evening routine by myself while Olivia stayed in the bedroom, doing God knows what. I lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, thinking about how I'd become the only parent in a two-parent household. That's when it hit me, really hit me, I wasn't in a partnership at all. I was running a full-service life support system for someone who'd decided she was entitled to my labor, but wasn't responsible for any of her own. And the worst part was, she convinced herself she was the victim in all of this. I fell asleep that night with one thought running through my head, on repeat, like a mantra I couldn't shake: what happens if I just stop doing everything and let the consequences land where they're supposed to? The next morning, I woke up and made a decision that probably should have come years earlier. I was done being the only adult in this house who gave a damn about keeping our lives from falling apart. I didn't announce it. Didn't sit Olivia down for some dramatic conversation about how things were going to change. I just quietly stopped doing all the extra stuff that had somehow become my responsibility, even though we were supposed to be equal partners. No more fixing things the second they broke. No more jumping in to solve problems Olivia created through her own negligence. No more pretending that her complete disengagement from our family life was normal or acceptable. The first test came maybe 3 days later. Olivia came into my home office, where I was finishing up some emails before dinner, holding that same kitchen drawer. My duct tape fix had apparently given up. She announced that the thing was broken again, like she was reporting a natural disaster. And I could see she expected me to drop everything and handle it immediately, the way I always had. I looked up from my laptop, looked at the drawer, looked back at her face, and just said, very calmly, that it was unfortunate. In that tone you use when someone tells you information that doesn't require your action. She stood there for a solid 10 seconds, clearly waiting for me to elaborate or offer to fix it. When I just went back to typing, she actually huffed, loud, like a teenager who'd been told no. She demanded to know if I was going to fix it, her voice getting shrill in that way that used to make me cave immediately, because I hated conflict. I replied with a simple, no, without even looking up, my fingers still moving across the keyboard like this was the most normal conversation in the world. She practically shouted, "Why not?" I could feel her getting more agitated by the second, because this wasn't following the script we'd been acting out for years. I stopped typing, leaned back in my chair, looked her dead in the eye, and said, "Because I'm not your dad, Olivia." With the exact same inflection she'd used on me dozens of times. The look on her face was worth every uncomfortable second that followed. She opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again like a fish gasping for air, and finally just turned around and walked out with the broken drawer still in her hands, slamming the office door hard enough that I heard Leo ask from the living room if everything was okay. That became my new default response to everything. A polite declination, followed by her own words thrown right back at her. Watching her try to process this role reversal was almost funny, except it was also deeply sad. Olivia had spent so long treating me like a combination of ATM, handyman, and personal assistant that she genuinely seemed confused when I stopped playing along. Like she couldn't compute that actions have consequences, and relationships require actual reciprocity. The house started falling apart in small ways. Not catastrophically, but enough to be noticeable. Things I would have normally handled before they became problems just sat there, getting worse. The garage door opener died and stayed dead for 2 weeks because Olivia kept saying she'd call someone, but never did. So, she had to manually open it every time she needed to leave, which was maybe twice a week, because she rarely went anywhere. One of the kitchen cabinet doors came completely off its hinges and just leaned against the wall for days while Olivia stepped around it, occasionally commenting to me that it was dangerous and someone should really do something about it. The lawn grew wild because the mower ran out of gas, and apparently filling it was beyond Olivia's capabilities, even though I'd shown her how to do it 3 separate times, and it literally involved unscrewing a cap and pouring. I kept the kids fed, clean, and happy. Kept my own work and responsibilities handled. But everything that fell into the category of household maintenance that Olivia should have been contributing to just didn't get done. And I watched with morbid curiosity to see how long it would take her to either step up or completely melt down. What I didn't expect was the financial weirdness that started showing up when I actually sat down and looked at our bank statements instead of just glancing at the balances. We had a joint checking account that my paychecks went into, and I'd always trusted Olivia to be reasonable about spending, since she wasn't working and we'd agreed on a budget. But when I pulled 3 months of statements, I found hundreds of small transfers to her personal account that I'd never noticed before. $50 here, $80 there, sometimes $120. Never enough to trigger alarm bells, but adding up to almost $2,000 over the quarter. And every single transfer had vague descriptions like personal expenses or miscellaneous that told me exactly nothing. I started documenting everything. Not because I was planning anything specific yet, but because some instinct told me I needed a paper trail of what our actual life looked like. I took photos of the house in its natural state, the mess that accumulated when I wasn't constantly cleaning, the evidence that Olivia wasn't doing the childcare she claimed was so exhausting. I screenshot financial records, saved text message conversations where she'd refused to help with basic tasks. I kept a log of who was actually parenting our kids versus who was just existing in the same building as them. My brother came over one afternoon to help me install a new water heater because the old one had died, and I wasn't about to let my kids take cold showers just to prove a point. He took one look around the house and asked me, point blank, if everything was okay in my marriage. I gestured at the general chaos and asked him if it looked okay. He just shook his head and told me something that stuck, that I didn't have to live like this. I knew, of course, I knew. But knowing and doing are 2 very different things when you've got 2 kids and a decade of history and some stupid hope that maybe things could still turn around. That hope died completely the day I came home early from work because a client meeting got cancelled. I walked to hear Olivia on the phone in our bedroom, her door not quite closed all the way. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop. I was literally just standing in the hallway, about to announce I was home, when I heard her say, "No, I'm done. I've been done for months. I just need to figure out the cleanest way to exit." In a tone that was way too casual for the bomb she just dropped. My heart literally stopped. Just completely froze in my chest. And I stood there like an idiot, listening to her continue, telling whoever was on the other end that I'd be blindsided, but that wasn't her problem. And that she'd been talking to her life coach about how to handle the whole situation without looking like the bad guy. Ice water in my veins. That's what it felt like. Pure ice water replacing my blood, as I realized my wife wasn't just checked out, she was actively planning her escape and treating our marriage like a PR campaign she needed to manage. I backed up quietly, went back outside, sat in my car in the driveway for 20 minutes trying to process what I'd just heard. Then I pulled out my phone and searched for divorce attorneys in our area. I called the first one with good reviews, a woman named Sarah, who had a calm, no-nonsense voice, and I laid out the basics of my situation in the parking lot of my own house, because I couldn't risk Olivia overhearing. Sarah listened to everything. The weaponized incompetence, the financial shoddiness, the overheard conversation. And then she said something that changed everything. "If you think she's planning something, you need to act like she's already executed it." Those words hit me like a freight train, because she was absolutely right. That night, I couldn't sleep. Just lay there next to Olivia in our bed, watching her breathe peacefully like she wasn't actively plotting to blow up our kids' lives. And I made my decision. She thought she was going to control this narrative. Thought she was going to exit on her terms and paint me as the villain who didn't appreciate her. But I'd been documenting everything. And I had the truth on my side. If she wanted a clean exit, she was about to find out that clean doesn't mean easy. I spent the next 2 weeks moving in complete silence. Meeting with Sarah 3 more times to go over strategy and documentation. She walked me through every single step, like we were planning a military operation, which, I guess, in a way, we were. She told me to keep acting normal. Don't change my routine. Don't give Olivia any indication that I knew what she was planning. And definitely don't confront her, because that would just give her time to prepare her own counterattack. So, I played the role of the oblivious husband for 14 days, making dinner and doing bedtime routines and pretending I didn't know my wife was planning to ambush me with some carefully crafted exit speech. Honestly, it was one of the hardest things I've ever done, because every time she looked at me, I wanted to scream that I knew everything. Sarah advised me to open a separate bank account and be ready to move money the moment I filed. Not before, because any premature transfers could look bad in court. So, I had everything set up and waiting, like a loaded gun. Then Olivia made her move. And the timing was almost funny, because she clearly thought she was being strategic about it. It was a Friday evening. The kids were at her parents' house for a sleepover that she'd arranged earlier in the week. And looking back, I should have known something was up because Olivia never voluntarily dealt with coordinating kid logistics. She'd made this whole production of cooking dinner for just the 2 of us, which should have been my first red flag, because Olivia hadn't cooked anything more complicated than toast in about 18 months. We sat down at the table with her mediocre pasta, and she had this weirdly calm expression on her face, like she'd rehearsed this moment 100 times in the mirror. And then she just came out with it. She told me, very matter-of-factly, that she wasn't happy. Hadn't been happy for a long time. And she thought it would be best for everyone if we separated and eventually divorced. All delivered in this cold, corporate tone, like she was firing an underperforming employee. I watched her face as she spoke, looking for any sign of emotion or regret, or even basic human feeling. There was nothing there except maybe relief that she was finally saying the words out loud. She kept talking, saying things about how we'd grown apart and wanted different things, and how this didn't have to be ugly if we could just be adults about it. And I realized she was expecting me to fight back. To beg her to reconsider. To give her the dramatic scene she probably fantasized about, where she got to be the reasonable one. Instead, I just nodded slowly, took a sip of water, and said, "Okay. If that's what you want." In the most neutral voice I could manage. And I swear the confusion that flashed across her face was priceless. She actually stammered, clearly thrown off by my lack of resistance, and asked if I understood what she was saying, like maybe I was too stupid to grasp that my marriage was ending. I told her, very calmly, that I understood perfectly. That if she wanted a divorce, then we'd get a divorce, and that I hoped we could handle it maturely for the kids' sake. Basically giving her exactly what she claimed to want, while watching her try to process why this wasn't going according to her script. She recovered quickly, though. That cold mask sliding back into place. And she started talking about logistics and how we'd divide things, and how she'd probably keep the house since she was the primary caregiver. And I just kept nodding and agreeing in principle, while thinking about the process server who'd be knocking on our door in approximately 12 hours, and the bank transfers I'd be executing at dawn. I slept on the couch that night, not because she asked me to, but because I couldn't stand being in the same bed with her. I lay there in the dark, listening to her move around upstairs, and wondering if she was texting her life coach about how smoothly her big announcement had gone. Saturday morning came early for me. I was up at 6 a.m., and by 6:30, I'd executed the bank transfers Sarah had prepared, moving exactly half of our joint savings into my new account. And then I made coffee and waited. At exactly 9 a.m., there was a knock on the door. Olivia was still upstairs sleeping in, because why would today be any different? I answered it and took the envelope from the process server while she was still in her bathrobe. I went to the bottom of the staircase and called up that she had a visitor, my voice steady and calm like I was announcing a package delivery. She came down looking annoyed and disheveled, probably thinking it was a neighbor or someone selling something. The process server handed her the papers and explained, very professionally, that she was being served with divorce proceedings. I watched her face cycle through emotions so fast, it was almost comical. Confusion melting into shock, melting into something that looked almost like betrayal, before finally landing on pure fury. She started to say something to the process server, her voice rising, but he just gave a polite nod and walked back to his car, because his job was done, and he'd clearly dealt with worse. Olivia spun around to face me, holding the papers in her shaking hands. The look she gave me was something I'd never seen before, like she couldn't quite believe I was real. She demanded to know what I'd done, her voice tight and controlled in that way that meant she was absolutely losing it internally. And I explained, very calmly, that I'd filed for divorce, just like she wanted. I just handled it first, to make sure everything was processed fairly and legally. She started yelling then. Really yelling. About how I'd ambushed her, and how this wasn't how it was supposed to happen, and how dare I do this without warning her first. The irony was so thick I almost laughed, because apparently warning your spouse was only required when the request came from her side. I let her yell herself out while I sipped my coffee. Just standing there, watching this person I'd spent a decade with completely fall apart over losing control of something she'd literally asked for less than 12 hours ago. Then I suggested, very calmly, that she should probably read through the documents, especially pages 3 through 7, because there was a lot of important information in there. That's when she actually sat down and started reading. And I watched her face go from red with anger to white as paper as she got to the section about asset protection, and the temporary financial orders, and the custody filing. She looked up at me with these wide eyes and asked, in this small voice, if I'd really frozen the accounts. And I explained that I'd secured our assets, exactly as my attorney had advised. And yes, I'd filed for primary custody of Leo and Maya, because the documentation clearly showed who'd been doing the actual parenting for the past 2 years. She kept reading, getting paler with each page. And when she got to the exhibit section, with all my photos and bank records and text message screenshots, something in her just broke. She started crying. These big, gasping sobs, but they weren't sad tears. They were angry tears, frustrated tears, the tears of someone who'd just realized they'd been playing checkers while I was playing chess. The next few weeks were absolutely brutal. Not because the legal process was complicated, but because Olivia completely lost her mind when she realized she couldn't control the story anymore. Her parents called me within 24 hours, her mom screaming about how I was destroying their daughter, and how could I be so cruel. I very calmly told them I'd be happy to send over the documentation if they wanted to see what their daughter had actually been doing for the past 2 years. They went silent after that. No more calls, no more accusations, just radio silence that told me everything I needed to know about what they'd seen in those files. Her friends started backing away, too. The ones who'd been all supportive of her "my husband doesn't appreciate me" narrative suddenly got real quiet when they saw actual evidence of who was doing what in our marriage. Olivia tried coming back to the house multiple times during the separation period, always using the kids as an excuse, but really just wanting to talk about how we were throwing away 10 years over nothing, and how maybe we'd both overreacted, and wasn't there some way to fix this? I told her the same thing every single time, that the marriage was over, that I'd given her years to be a partner, and she'd chosen not to be. And that I wasn't interested in fixing something she'd already decided to destroy. She just hadn't expected me to light the match first. The divorce finalized after 4 months, faster than I'd expected, because Olivia eventually realized that fighting me wasn't going to get her anywhere when I had documentation for everything. I got primary custody, with her getting the kids every other weekend. She kept her car and her personal savings, and we split the house equity 50/50, which meant selling it and both of us moving into smaller places. Leo and Maya adjusted better than I'd feared. Kids are resilient like that. And having a stable routine with one parent who was actually present turned out to be way better than living in a house with 2 parents where only one gave a damn. I'm not going to pretend everything is perfect now, or that I don't have moments where I wonder if I could have done something different earlier. But mostly, I just feel this overwhelming sense of relief. Like I'd been carrying a weight that was crushing me, and someone finally let me put it down. Olivia's living her own life now, doing whatever it is she does with her life coach and her yoga classes and her personal journey, or whatever she's calling it these days. Honestly, I don't think about her much, except when she's late picking up the kids or forgets to send back Maya's inhaler. The thing that keeps running through my head, the one thought that sums up this whole mess better than anything else I could say, is pretty simple: I didn't quit the marriage. I just finally woke up and realized I'd been in it alone for years. And the only person who was surprised when I stopped carrying both of us was the one who'd forgotten how to walk on her own. What would you have done if you found yourself in my shoes?